Let's take a look at parametrics and patterns. So Fusion 360 is a parametric modeler, meaning we can have variables within the software that help us adjust what the models look like. We can have different features of a model determine how other features are built and designed. We're going to take this really easy though, and we're going to look at how we can design a simple plastic cover for a vent. To do that, I'm going to set up two parameters. So I'm going to go modify, change parameters. And I have to click the plus beside my user parameter. And we're going to start off with the thickness of that plastic. So plastic thickness, we'll use 3 mil acrylic, so we'll just say 3, and OK. And then that's given us that parameter. We're also going to have a series of vent holes. So I'm going to go vent holes as well. I'll just set that to 3 again. And OK, so I've got two preset parameters. I click on OK, and now I'm going to start my sketch. So create sketch. If you're in the older version, it's under the sketch panel. Click on a plane, and that's bringing it into focus. I'm going to do a 2-point rectangle, and I'm going to do it 100 mils by 100 mils. So really easy there, 100 by 100. You can see that it's all black lines, meaning it's fully constrained. I'm going to finish sketch, and I'm going to extrude the sketch, the plastic thickness. So plastic thickness, click on that, and go OK. So that's given me the thickness of my material. Now for the vent, I'm going to start a new sketch on here. So create sketch, clicking on there, and I'm going to draw a circle in the middle. Now remember that the triangle constraint means that it's at a midpoint. So see, I've got a midpoint there, so a blue dotted line shows up. I should have a midpoint here, blue dotted line. If I move to the middle, you'll see that there's two blue dotted lines, which is meaning that this is in the middle. Now I'm going to make the diameter of that vent hole. So I just started typing vent hole, and you can see it shows up. And that's going to assign the value of 3 millimeters. You can see FX 3 millimeters there for that circle. So the first way that I can do this circular pattern is to, rectangular pattern, is to go to create rectangular pattern, and I can click on this circle. Now by default it should actually be under extent, but that's all right. So what we're going to do is we are going to change it to spacing, and we can pull it this way. You can see that we've got 3 showing up that way, 3 showing up that way in our little grid. So first thing, let's take this and center it on our piece of plastic. To do that, we would come here to our direction and say symmetric, and our other direction we would say symmetric. And you can see now how it's centered itself on our piece. Now as far as the quantity that goes, because we started drawing in the middle, we will need to have an odd number to keep it nice and centered. So I'm going to say 13 and 13 that way. And you can see my grid is kind of, my vent has outsized my rectangle, but that's okay, or my square. So now we can go back into distance and have a play. Now we want this to be parametric. So for my distance, I'm going to say vent holes again. But this time I'm just going to say times 2. So that will give me a little bit of a gap between them. I'm going to use that same distance down here for the other distance. So essentially the space between the holes, or from the center points of the holes, is double the size of the holes. We've got that all sorted out. We click OK, and that leaves us a grid. So I'm going to finish the sketch. Now this grid has to be extruded. So they're all individual things that we're extruding. I want to click on front, which brings it back in just so it's in 2D. I'm going to go to extrude, and you could sit here and pick these one at a time. It will be forever. Or you can click, make a square from the top left corner down to the bottom right, and that should auto select all of those holes. Bring it up like that, and I want to extrude into my material -0.5 negative that plastic thickness. So you see when I do that, it just shows that they've cut in. I click OK, and I've got a grid of those holes. So one simple way to do that rectangular pattern, and it's given us the grid. The other way to do this is to come back to this stage where I've got just the single hole. I'm going to finish the sketch, and I'm just going to extrude that single hole. So I'm going to come back in here, click on that, and again, negative plastic thickness. And okay, so now I've got that hole. Now instead of doing my grid in 2D, which is a bit harder to edit later on, I'm going to go to create this time, and pattern, rectangular pattern. So now I'm in 3D. The interface looks about the same, but I'm in 3D. I'm going to zoom in, grab that face around the outside, back to my settings here. So I've got direction, so I need to click on direction and just pick on an edge. And you'll see that that brought up 2 arrows, which is perfect. My distance is still spacing, but probably came up as extent by default. My distance in between, again, let's go vent holes times 2. Copy that and dump it down in this one, so vent holes times 2. You'll see it's starting to show up. Just like last time, it's not centered, so I'm going to change it, the direction type to symmetric. Change that to metric type to symmetric. You'll see it's now centered. And I can bring this up to the 13 holes that I want. So the pattern's the same. I click OK. The end result's the same, but this time it's shown up in your timeline as a feature. So you could just right-click, edit feature, and go back and change that if you wanted. So now let's take a look back at those parameters we set at the beginning. If I go modify, change parameters, I can now have a play with my different things here. So let's say I change my plastic thickness now to 6 mils, and we look at it, we've got that thicker plastic. If I go back to change parameters, I can play with that vent hole size. Maybe we're going to go to a smaller hole. So let's say 2 mils. Now we've got a smaller grid with smaller holes in it. And again, modify, change parameters. If we go too big on this, it's going to overstretch the actual size of the piece, but let's say 4. And there, it's gone right to the edges of my piece. So that's probably not going to work in that state. So let's set it back to 3, where it's pretty much how we designed it, was around it being 3 mils. Okay, there we go, back to normal. Now you could add some holes around the corners of this so you could screw it into place. But essentially, that's parameters, and that is rectangular patterns.